Okay, hello, hi everybody. So happy that we could have this weird video moment together. So I'll be talking to you for a while, and then next time I see you, hopefully y'all can talk back to me. So let's get started. So this is class number 3, Urban Studies. The video's in 2 parts. So, watch the first half and then come back to the second half whenever you can. Also, please, of course, do the readings for next week, and then we can talk about those plus the previous readings when we get together next Monday. So here's our content for today. This is an introduction to history and equity in urban development. And as I mentioned, it's 10,000 years in, 60 minutes. So it's really like a speed dating event for you all with this piece of history or these pieces of history. And the idea is to just present some perspective on urbanization so that we can see essentially what the kind of global development looked like, but also across time, so that we are taken out of, for a few minutes, our idea that cities are something that just evolved in the last couple of hundred years. So it's sort of fun, actually. So we start with ancient Mesopotamia. From then until the present, major cities and urban development have, I'm going to talk, I'll show you some pictures. Major cities and urban development have placed economy, equity, and health in varying degrees of access and opportunity. While we cannot do 10,000 years of global history comprehensively, we can look at snapshots of development of cities and of how equity might have played out. So the question is, who writes history? So as we're looking at history, who are the authors? And you all know the answer to this. Most of history is actually not in the books, right? So there's the value of oral history, of storytelling, culture, and music. Most well-known writers, historians, and philosophers from whom our Western and US behavior norms and development are learned came from and or was written by colonizers and or folks like the founding fathers, a narrow group of Anglo-European men. Plato, Socrates, Ovid, the Bible, Shakespeare, the kings of France and England and Spain and Germany, our friends Darwin, Freud, and Einstein. All are coming from some perspective and some communities and some populations of colonizers. So just a quick check-in about colonization, was so powerful. And by the early part of the 1900s, so 100 years ago, approximately, colonization was so great that the Western powers controlled 90% of Africa and 57% of Asia. So that gives us an idea of the prevalence of Western viewpoints and resources. So we can consider what we refer to with that in mind. And now also, hopefully, we should be able to search for, to raise up, to highlight, to accept and value other global stories, beliefs, and perspectives. So from no cities, essentially, up through the 1800s is what we're going to do today. There are big ideas, big changes. The overarching theme for us, I think, will always return to the ideas of equity and economy, economic structures. So the readings that you had, they were just little snippets to sort of feed your curiosity. Every culture and region has had a very different development trajectory. So looking at the emergence of cities across 6 continents, we can't look at them at the same time. So for example, between urban growth in Turkey and China, 1,000 years may have passed in between. Between China and South America, another 1,000 years may have gone by. So for example, in one area, there would be advanced engineering, planning, and decision-making, let's say 4,500 years ago, and yet other regions had not yet begun pottery making. So imagine that. Others at that same time were writing poetry. So there's this really, really big difference in scale and time. and geography. We also see the changes over time accelerated in scale and frequency. How many changes? How soon? How quickly, right? So after the first urban spaces, which we'll look at in a minute, in Katal, for example, in Turkey, things did not change too much from approximately 10,000 years ago to approximately 1,000 years ago, as compared to the Middle Ages through modern day, which is just 1,500 years. The change accelerated. So we also are going to jump through that quickly. So just to talk about development for a minute, may have depended on elements such as water, land, and weather, for example. Transport impacts were reduced when some central trade could happen, right? Population growth, shared knowledge, and technology in the commons may have spurred productivity, which spurred growth. Urban centers on trade routes thrive. Cities also provided protection. So we're talking about people going in the very early days, right there in the origins from nomads, to cities. Cities provided protection from roaming enemies, human or animal. But there's no single factor. There's not just trade, it's not just protection. No single factor in the formation of cities. For example, some cities were political seats, right? Seats of power. Some might have been sparsely populated. Some might have had religious functions. For example, a location for development might have been chosen by a location that had spiritual or astronomic significance. Some, as we say, were trade centers on a river, for example. So from our origins as nomads, subsistence livers, hunter-gatherers, then we started to have agriculture. And alongside agriculture comes innovations such as pottery that for food storage that enabled folks and enabled and facilitated people to live together. So we have here, this is Katal in Turkey. This is the first known image we have of settlement, and it's sort of fascinating. So what we see here are rooftops, and people entered their homes from the roof and went down into them. We don't know a whole heck of a lot. We imagine there were rudimentary ladders. We think this is an image of a volcano in the orange piece, although some have interpreted it as an animal. So there's a whole heck of a lot we don't know, but we do know that as many as 10,000 people might have lived in Katal, and it is 6,000 years ago, which makes it about 6,000 BCE, which makes it about 8 or 9,000 years ago. Forgive my hasty math. So we also saw in other regions, for example, in the Americas, there pre-Columbian civilizations that were marked by similar kinds of permanent settlements. But we see an incredible amount of engineering and development. So you all read about Olmec, and you read about the Chauvin archaeological site. So what we have there is we have civic development, we have agriculture, we have monumental architecture, earthworks, and complex societal hierarchies. So some of those civilizations faded before the first European settler colonizers and are only known through archaeological investigations. Pieces like this of art and visual history and oral histories that may have been passed down for thousands of years. So you all read about Olmec and Chauvin. Chauvin was a gathering place for people of that region to come together and worship. So there's an example of the choice of a location because of its spiritual power. And they created this valley dominating monument, right, which made it a pan-regional place of importance. Somewhere in the same period, BC, we have the Greek and Roman empires, which we, learn so much about, right? That's best known to us from literature and creation of government and creation of infrastructure, things like roads. Warfare led to the fall of Rome, pushed populations back into rural zones. However, as the evolution of cities reemerged in other regions, it did as well around the Greek and Roman empires and led to stronger urban centers that were able to withstand centuries of plagues and famine and conflict. So again, across the globe now, we're looking at other development. So you also read about the Shang dynasty, which was roughly 1600 to 1000 BC. This geographic area was called the birthplace of, or the cradle of Chinese civilization. While this is true in some regard, one must keep in mind that the Shang was but one of several contemporary civilizations concurrent contemporary civilizations in China. So also globally, with our global perspective, and we're going to move on with our images here in a second, pre-Middle Ages, so also BC and in the turn to AD, there was a vibrant Islamic trade system in Africa. Muslim kingdoms burgeoned in Senegal, Mali, Chad, and Ethiopia, for examples, and surrounding regions up through the 10th and 11th centuries. So before we move fully into the Middle Ages, we'll just take a look at this. So this is the beginning of the Middle Age. Middle Ages are roughly 500 AD. So this is so astonishingly beautiful to me because, we still have trouble having free education and healthcare. We're still having trouble providing bathing and libraries and trash collection to people. So it's really beautiful and kind of stunning to see what was happening at the birth of the Middle Ages in places like Iraq. So our next image is of a 13th century mosque. So this also is Middle Ages, of course. Mogadishu, which is now the capital of the modern state of Somalia, was far removed from the complicated war-ravaged city that it is today. It was a peaceful settlement of trade, characterized by relationships between people of different religions and ethnic backgrounds. So we also tend to think very broadly of Africans, a monolith, as people rooted in nature, but history teaches us another lesson. It shows Africans who were kings and diplomats, merchants, clerics, and builders of these incredible religious and civil monuments that can still be visited today. So these people interacted with each other across the continent, as well as with, pardon me, merchants and diplomats from the wider world. Okay, so where are we? So, okay, we're in the Middle Ages still. So we know in Europe, there's war, power struggles, religious dominance, various plagues. But there was also a development of crafts, there was a development of democracy, and there was a development of craft guilds. So people who had crafts unified around their common trade. In the Americas, incredible Aztec, North, South, and Central American indigenous cities were being founded. So, for example, in North America, there was agriculture amongst the Native Americans, the American Indians in the Southeast, for example, around 1000 BC, so pre all of this, which marked a slow transition. So again, thinking about some places accelerated very quickly and some had a longer, slower trajectory. So during this period called the Woodland period in the southeast of the US, the Native Americans concentrated their settlements near streams and rivers where rich soil allowed for successful farming. There, they were also able to establish continent-spanning trade and exchange networks and build earthworks. So we've seen some of those mounds, maybe you have, which were this incredible sort of earthwork architecture. Let's look at another image. Let's go to, so Central and South America. So also this is early Middle Ages. We see these really beautiful cities, temples and communities built again, incredible engineering, incredible cohesiveness to make decisions and develop these sorts of impressive structures. So in the South and Central American, we have Mayan, Aztec, Incan cultures who thrived until the Spanish came. And not that it was all fun and games, they had their own wars and their own growth and fall of civilizations, right? So these are just a few of the thousands and thousands and thousands of temples and urban communities that created art. They created cultural traditions, societal traditions, and monuments that were meant to last for thousands and thousands of years, and many of which we can still see, right, if we are able to do that kind of travel. All right, so now let's continue on our global excursion here. Let's go to China in the Middle Ages. So talk about structure, talk about engineering and construction. Great Wall of China, 13,000 miles and built over a span of 2,000 years. So the organization of that and the planning of that and the foresight to start something and then pass on that knowledge over multiple generations is stunning, staggering. And again, this, this idea of engineering, that you have a 5-story pagoda built in 652. During the Middle Ages, what I read is the Chinese enjoyed a higher standard of living than almost any other contemporary nation at their time, made possible by their already established centuries of stable civilization. While Europe was amid dark times, poverty, war, and disease, China was flourishing, producing new art, science, literary works, and stunning engineering and construction. So beautiful and exciting. So at the same time in the Middle Ages, going from the early Middle Ages, Middle Ages to the late Middle Ages, we go to Japan, to the Edo period. I don't think I have sure if I have a photo of that or not. Let's see. Yes, we do. Okay. So in the history of Japan, Japanese society was under the rule, and forgive my killing the language here, the Tokugawa shogunates and the country's 300 regional leaders. This period, the Edo period, was characterized by economic growth, strict social order, interestingly, isolationist foreign policies, popular enjoyment of arts and culture, and my favorite, sustainable forest management. So they looked around and saw that they were quickly using up their resources, and hundreds of years ago decided to be sustainable. This period bequeathed a vital commercial sector in these urban centers, these growing urban centers. There was a well-educated elite. There was a sophisticated government bureaucracy. There was productive agriculture and a closely unified nation with highly developed financial and marketing systems, including a national infrastructure of roads. And interesting side note, and clean water, yay. Interesting side note that part of their program at the time was the eradication of Christianity. An effort obviously did not 100% succeed. So it's just interesting to think about in another class, on another day, what was happening around religious cooperation and collaboration on other continents. And then, for example, Europe, as we know, and here in Japan, a negation of the acceptance of multiple religions. Okay, so all of these things happened over a period of, we can roughly say, 6 or 7,000 years. And just a reminder, different places, different times, and many, many years intervening. So this, though, this period, gets us up to the 1800s. So we're going to actually backtrack a little bit. We need to go back to approximately 1300 and look at Europe in our next iteration. But I'm going to stop the recording, and y'all can take a break if you'd like, and then come back and open up the new recording, and we're going to revisit Europe in the Renaissance.